Well, welcome back, everybody, to Culz Interviews. Today we have a returning guest. We got Wally Wagner. You guys should recognize Wally from our previous interview as well as some panel shows we've done. So, Wally, welcome back.
Thank you, Keegan. Appreciate it. Sam, appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
I will say, for those of you that may just be listeners of the podcast Culz Interviews, Wally's done... Well, he did have two books at that time, but we only discussed the one. But he has now released his third book, Nucleus, which is what we're going to attempt to cover today. There's a lot of topics, so we'll see how much we can cover in this episode. We can always do a follow-up. But Wally, right off the bat, it's a different book than Crossing the Crevasse. Is that correct? Like, it definitely seems like a different theme. That was more like UFOs and stuff. This is more like a spiritual kind of thing, correct?
That is correct. The Crossing the Crevasse was the start of my, I guess you would say, spiritual path that Michael Carter put me on. And at the start, I just had to know, were things true or false based on a lot of teachings that I had. So I incorporated, the age of the earth and crop circles and a bunch of things like that in Crossing the Crevasse, as well as a few biblical snafus and a little bit of disclosure. And are we alone in the universe? That kind of thing. And then it's, as the spiritual journey has progressed, it has gotten, I guess I could use the word deeper and deeper until it is, it's second nature now that we're not alone. It's, for me, it's basically an upturning of everything I have been taught, or most of everything I have been taught. A lot of it in my world now does not jive with me anymore. So I guess I really unloaded in the Nucleus, kind of the third and final book of my trilogy. I guess I didn't want to say go off on a deep end, but I mean, I probably stated 70 different verses that the God of the Old Testament is just the God of Israel. And, other references, maybe 30 references to UFOs in the Bible, just as a recap and where they are indirect and direct. And I don't know, a bunch of different other things, including in my world now, I have a hard time accepting the Old Testament God being the same as the New Testament God. And I give all my reasons pretty much in the Nucleus. And it is watered down from what it was before. I had as you may know, had a mild heart attack while I was writing one of the chapters. And I deemed that to be from the Holy Spirit above.
Yeah, your deleted chapter.
Maybe don't be so pointed in my comments, but I think I got my points across, fairly distinctly. And if there was a church today that subscribed to the Marcion line of thought, the fellow that wrote the first, or actually had the first Bible back around 135 or 140 AD, I would probably attend that church. And since that church doesn't exist, if I had my pick today, it would be a UU church, Universal Unitarian, but there's none here close to me. So I'm just kind of floating now. If I go to church, it's whichever one I want to go to when I want to go to it. And sometimes I'll sit there and twiddle my thumbs. I critique the preacher all the time now. They say, this is right, that's wrong. I don't get a whole lot out of it for me personally. Maybe it's, I've studied so much for me that I feel that I can critique what's being said and what he's missing or she's missing and what should have been added and references here and there and that kind of thing. And it's a different flavor for me now when I go to church than what it was in the past. So anyway, I share a lot of that in the book.
Yeah, and going back to your heart attack, you were talking about it in the book where the doctors couldn't find a blockage or anything. It was really unusual to them too, right?
Yep. It's a fairly new term called a minoca. It's basically where you have the myocardial infarction, but there's no coronary artery blockages. And that term's only been around for about since 2016, for the most part, they're still not real sure on how that happens. They're guessing that it's the small arteries and veins on the exterior of the heart that do not show up on any of these tests. That perhaps they were in an acute, I guess, stress situation where it caused the troponins to increase in the blood like you had a blockage. It's the troponins in the blood, which is a measurement of a protein that tells the doctors that you are having a heart attack. And I did have the increased troponins. So by definition, I had a heart attack. It's just I had 0 blockages. And from that standpoint, I'm glad to find out I have 0 blockages. I mean, they put a percent to it. It was like 0.1% blockages. My Widowmaker was completely clear. So, I'm happy with all that, but I still know what happened and how it felt. So it did cause me to basically take out one chapter that I had been working on and, let's say, soften a little bit what I left in the book.
Yeah, I was going to say, reading it, you said made you reevaluate the chapter, and that's why it's not in there. And I know you teased that early on in the book, and then as far as we'll learn why that was a deleted chapter, and then when you get to it, you're like, oh, wow, that's huge. So we're thankful you're okay.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be amongst us.
And we're glad you're here. For anyone that perhaps they stumbled upon this episode and they've never heard your story, what was kind of like that trigger incident that sent you this pathway?
I'm going back to 2016. I was a mailman at the time, a rural carrier here in Bedford County, Virginia. I'm located in between Roanoke and Lynchburg. It was September. It was a beautiful day. The sky was vivid blue, dark blue. It had been cool the night before, so the air was very clear. I was making a delivery at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in front of a lady's yard walking back to my vehicle. Something or somebody told me to stop and look up. And right over my head is what we now call a tic tac, a white, oblong, or cylindrical craft. And it let me see it for about 3 seconds, and then it was no longer there. It completely disappeared. And it had no nacelles, no wings, no windows, appeared as a solid white object, very reflective, by the way. And it either went into another dimension, or it took off so fast I couldn't see it, or it cloaked and was there all along. But over a period of time, it has completely changed me. I can honestly say that. And I'm not alone when I say that. I've talked to, many other people that have had an experience, some more in depth than what I had. But it always seems to be life-changing in different degrees. Mine's been more spirituality type because I was, I considered myself a conservative Christian at the time. I was teaching Sunday school, actually. And coming from a conservative Baptist and Methodist background, I can actually say my ground has been shaken. The rug has been jerked out from underneath of me. I've done a lot of study now myself, a lot of study on early church history and what the early church believed, and where we're at today and what's transpired since then with the Bible. And knowing what I know now and knowing what is typically taught in one of the 33,000 churches that are out there, or different religions that are out there, denominations, I guess is the right word to say, that what we're being taught is only snippets of the truth. It's been, I guess, tainted. And that tainting goes back all the way back, to the canonist. And I'm convinced now that what we ended up with in the Bible, or what we call the Bible, should have been bound in 2 separate books. So the Old Testament should have been separate from the New Testament. The Old Testament basically Hebrew, the New Testament basically Greek. We kind of forced meshed them together to get what we have. And there's a lot of instances where what is said in the Old Testament does not jive with what's in the New Testament. But one of the things that has really caught me is that Jesus taught 2 tiers of knowledge. This is biblical. We got basically the parables, where the disciples got the upper tier knowledge. And that upper tier knowledge, I have found out, was heavily influenced by Gnosticism. And, the Gnostics were a thorn in the early church's side, and they finally got rid of them. But I honestly believe that Jesus was influenced by the Gnostics, and a lot of the books that were taken out should have been left in. Heavy duty stuff in some of the books, like the Pistis Sophia, like the Book of Enoch, like the Book of Thomas. The Book of Thomas I put in the appendix of the nucleus again because it's so important. It's perhaps the preeminent Gnostic book. But if you read all these books, and there's too many overlaps to realize that this is just not a one-off. I mean, reincarnation was real. It's expressed in many of these books. It was an accepted tenet in the early church, but it got weeded out. And that's a big thing for me, because once you believe in reincarnation, you realize that maybe you've been alive before you inhabit this body, and you're going to be alive again after you dispose of this body, physical body. And that makes this life adventure much, much longer than the one life scenario that we're taught to believe because of that one phrase by Paul. For me now, and this has come with, again, a lot of study and including meditation. I get into meditation a little bit, but this life that we live is really all about increasing our consciousness. And that's really where I stand now. That incorporates meditation in doing that, realizing that you have a soul, your purpose in the universe, realizing that you have an ego, and that ego thing is not taught in the churches. In fact, it's our ego that gets us in a lot of problems. It's our ego that causes us to want things we don't need, and put the material things like you see behind me in our lives that end up distracting. It has nothing to do with your spiritual development. And these are just some of the things that I have realized now, and I referenced several of them, in the book, and I put it out there for people to, I guess, open their eyes, if you will. I know that phrase is often overused, but expand their mind. I'm a firm believer in Oliver Wendell Holmes' statement that once the mind is expanded, it never goes back to its original shape. And coming from the ultra-conservative Christian background, you're taught to stay in between two barriers. As long as you're in between the two barriers, you're fine. But you can't go too much right. You can't go too much left. That's not biblical. That's not what God taught. And for me, those two barriers have really been expanded to give me quite a bit of room in between. For me, God is something different now than what I was taught that he was. If you follow the Old Testament, 70, I think I put 78 people for sure saw God. If you include Gershom, Zipporah, Moses' son, you could add one to that. If you include one of the Psalms, you can add probably hundreds to that. But specifically in the New Testament, no one sees God. So what I'm really trying to bring out in Nucleus is this God that we often call God, we often call him he, when in fact there is no he and she. Neither of us are a he or she. The soul has no sex, if you will. but we call him he because he appeared as a he in the Old Testament in a craft, without a doubt. Just the God of Israel, nothing to do with other countries, nothing to do with other areas of the world, nothing to do with Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Zoroastrianism, all these other religions that were already in existence. They're still here. In fact, Jesus probably went to India. I'm fully convinced of that, but it's not in the Bible. All we have is just, a few snippets of when he was young, and then the 3 years of his ministry. And mysteriously or ominously, everything else is missing on the life of this Jesus. And I have a hard time with that now. I really do. You wonder, could you have been a fly on the wall when the canonists were deciding on what was going to become the canon? There's so much stuff that was left out. And some of that stuff that's left out is our own fault, by the way. When the Protestant Reformation happened, you kissed purgatory goodbye. You kissed praying for the dead goodbye. A lot of the saints that the mainline Catholic Church, venerates all the time, that saints had a lot of power. We don't even hear that, aside from maybe St. Valentine's Day or something like that, St. Patrick's Day in the Protestant church. All the other saints aren't even mentioned, and you go through life not even knowing about them. So I just want people to realize that what you're taught, and a lot of us want to be taught, and we want to think we're being taught right, but we're being taught from an agenda that's been in place since the canon was created. And I've probably said too much already. I see Sam shaking his head, but it's a very, very, very narrow, set of barriers that you're taught, that you can't go on either side, and that no longer works for me. It doesn't work at all.
Well, I was going to say, how much do you think of the canon, as you're talking about it, is perhaps due to like Rome and how Rome put stuff together?
Well, that's possible. I mean, most of it, I think, ended up being, flavored with Romanism. But unfortunately, I think the Greeks had their act together perhaps just as much as, if not more. And a lot of the upper Greek teachings were X'd out. They did not make the cut. And I have a problem with that. I really do. If you look at Origen's writings, the few that are still out there that weren't tainted by Rufinus, you look at Clement of Alexandria, you look at some other early church fathers, without a doubt, reincarnation, existed for 200 years in the early church.
And not to totally go off the rails, but I might have been watching Expedition Unknown recently, so I wanted to get your thoughts on two articles that are related to religion. One is obviously the Shrouded Turin, but then another is the Holy Grail. And in that, there was a gentleman who claimed it was actually Mary's like little scent jar that she collected the blood of Jesus. Like, do you think it was actually a drinking chalice, or, I mean, have you looked into any of that? Do you think they're real or not?
I have looked into it, and in my mind right now, I think the honest answer is we're not real sure exactly what it was or is. And I think that's the honest way I could answer your question. We're often, taught or shown on TV that it's a chalice, and some probably a fancy one, but a fancy one doesn't seem to equate to me with being something that Jesus would necessarily have. He'd probably have a plain one. But we're not really sure what it is. It may be a cup, whether it was a cup that was used for wine or a cup that was used for blood. I can't answer that. I really can't. I mean, there's a part of me that says, well, maybe they'll find it on Oak Island. Who knows? Maybe the Knights Templar had it and it got moved to New Scotland. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, and then another thing too, before I know we had talked before we went to Roswell, but going to Roswell, I always like to read books, and I read
Hmm.
one called Witness to Roswell. Donald Schmidt and Thomas Carey wrote that one, and it was the 75th anniversary. One thing that kind of got me was the description of the craft, because I think we always think like a classic flying saucer, like you'd
Hmm.
see in sci-fi, but how it was described in the book was egg-shaped. Now, this is before Tic Tacs were around, so perhaps just the naming's different, but it definitely reminded me of the cover of your first book. I mean, I know you have a new cover now, but with that Tic Tac shape. I mean, have you read Witness to Roswell, and do you think it's just the same type of crafts?
I have not read that particular book. I have read, of course, multiple other books and can tell you that these crafts have been with us since before Christ, and they have come in all shapes and sizes. Cigars, cylindrical football size, which is probably what you're equating to the egg, even square cubes, plus the disc type, plus other shapes, boomerangs and triangles and things of that nature. That just that tells me that of course we're not alone, but we're interacting or they're interacting with us from multiple places, perhaps different species. And there again, I've read books that would say that we're upwards of 80 different catalog species now that we know that are out there. And that includes, of course, the grays, the tall grays, the small grays, the Nordics, the mantis beings, the Altarians, and the list goes on. Reptiles, reptilians. So
Right. Yeah, we've talked to Michael Carter. I know you have as well. So
my
he's had,
mentor.
yeah, he's had quite a few really, um, I don't know, life-changing, really. I know for him it was terrifying, but now he looks back and he's, grateful for what he's seen. But it's amazing the different things he was able to see. When
True.
working with Michael, what all did you take away from him?
The most humble, most real, most founded individual I think I've been around in my lifetime. Last time we talked, I told him that he won't reincarnate. This is his last go around. He was ready, but he would say, "Look in the mirror." But when I do, I don't like what I see all the time when I look in the mirror. But intelligence, uh, and again, the humility, humbleness. He's the real deal. And I tell everybody I know, he is the real deal. He's not in this for fame. He's not in it for glory. What happened, I am 100% sure happened with his visitations, with the healing that he had in his
Mhm.
bedroom, with the beam going from the hand into his stomach and the clot being removed. And I give credit to the UU Church because he's been open about this, and he's still an active pastor. And I really give credit to the church and that congregation for having expanded minds to incorporate that in their beliefs.
Yeah, I know we've enjoyed our talks with him. He's been very kind and insightful too. I know with your book too, you discussed another book that had an influence on you, which was Chariots of the Gods.
Oh,
Uh, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
well, I like to talk if you haven't noticed. That was the first book I read that I could not put down until I finished. And this was a Saturday while I was in high school. And you normally don't want to take a Saturday to lay in bed and read a book when you're in high school, do you? But I was so enthralled by that book because it really was the first book to question things that I had read. I know Kehoe had some stuff out there and a few others, but this was the first book that I had read that really questioned wars in heaven, things being out of date, we're not alone, that kind of thing. And it just seemed like After I read that, though, the mainstream media was not ready to pick up and go with that. So for me, that just kind of got filed in my brain, and I'm glad I didn't forget about it, because so much stuff that is in there has for me in my world been proven true and is true. And it's made an impact. I mean, I'm an ancient alien believer without doubt. These gods, what we called gods, including, the one of Israel, plus his 69 siblings, by the way, which is never mentioned in a Protestant church, but is in the Bible and in the Ugaritic texts, which have recently been found. But they all came from the sky, and they did not come to destroy us, so we wouldn't be here now. So, I mean, you had, if you look around the world, we can even include the Anunnaki. I mean, they came from the sky too, but you can look at Vishnu, you can look at Krishna, you can look at Quetzalcoatl, you can look at Hermes, you can look at Mercury, you can look at Ra, Osiris, Enlil, Enki. I mean, they all came from the sky. And there's a reason they came. I guess they're explorers, or they wanted to teach us. They did not find us threatening. And another part of me says that maybe we're all brothers and sisters. We're just on different levels of consciousness. And we all perhaps fall under the same umbrella of what we call God. For me now, God is not a person. God is not even portrayed in the Old Testament. God is something much, much bigger, total spirit, total love, total light. Not someone who walked and well, I don't want to say too many derogatory things, but the more you study, the more you realize that there's no way on earth that the God of the Old Testament is the same as the God of the New Testament. My God now is something much, much bigger, total spirit, total light, and total love, and that includes children. And I think that's played out in Yeshua or Jesus. He wasn't called Jesus back then. There was no J, but Yeshua. You can look at that in so many ways. Turn the other cheek, for example, instead of the eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And the children were special to Yeshua, but there's many references, well, not many, but several, in the Old Testament where God said destroy everything, including sucklings and women, children, all the innocent people. And they were killed on their own land. They weren't trespassing. They were killed on their own land. I have real issues with that. And then you can even look at Elisha and being a young prophet, if you will, calling the bear out of the woods to eat up the children, or I guess they were adolescents because they called him bald. I mean, there just seemed to be no care for the innocent from what I read in the Old Testament. And that's completely different from the New Testament. That's one of the reasons I think the books should have been kept separate. Both valuable books. I'm not downing either of them. I'm just saying the Old Testament should have been bound separately from the New Testament. That's my world now and what I've come to realize. They would both be considered religious books, much like the Indian books and the Hindu books that are out there. So there you have it.
Yeah, I was going to say during your book, you do definitely try to distinguish the Old Testament God and the New Testament God.
Yep.
As far as being different beings.
I fall in line, as I say, with Marcion. He was Marcion of Snipe Oak. He was an early church father. He actually made the first Bible, not the Bible that we think of as being the Bible, but the first grouping of books bound together to be called a Bible, called the Testamentum, which came out in either 135 or 140 AD. If anything else, it I guess acted as a catalyst for the canonist, to get their act together. It still took a couple hundred years, but after that, they eventually did. They had a problem with Gnosticism. So once they got that out of the way, They got their act together for what ended up, in the Bible. But even the Apostles' Creed that's in the Bible is wrong. I mean, it specifically states Jesus Christ, the only Son of God. Well, I'm as much as a son of God as Jesus was. We all are. It's biblical, multiple places. And Jesus is not the only Son of God. You can start with Genesis chapter 6 and realize there's multiple sons of God. And I give a bunch of different verses, and a lot in the New Testament that say that, we are children of God too. So if we're children of God, and in John 14, Jesus says we'll even do miracles greater than he did, with no time reference given, that tells me that we're just children. And there again, there's multiple verses that say we are children. I know you have a daughter, Keegan, but she's still a cool, and someday she will grow up, won't she? Mm-hmm. Probably faster than you want, but it's in the blood. And I think we're all connected. I really do. I've come to this conclusion. It's in my gut from meditation that we are all brothers and sisters. And I separate that with a male and a female, but inside we're neither. Inside we're neither. That's why there's no marriage in heaven. When you're in your spiritual body, there is no male female. So there's so many things that you just get started off on. Like, it really bothers me now when all these singing goes on in church, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God. Well, that's not correct. It might be the only son born of a virgin of God, and that's not even correct either if you look at Buddha and Krishna. So you really everything's qualified. For me now, living where we live in the United States, so little reference is given to these other traditions which were in place and are still in place for thousands of years before, Judaism and Christianity started. And, it's a sad thing to say, but the areas where Yeshua roamed, you can include Jordan, you can include Turkey, you can include Greece, you can include, Iraq and all these places, Saudi Arabia. Very little Christianity left, by the way. And I make a reference of this, using Turkey for an example, rounded off to the nearest percent, 0% Christians. And here you had 5 of the churches of Revelation. That's place. It's where, John and Mary, the mother, went back to John's home, and Ephesus was, and there's just nothing left there. Same thing with Saudi Arabia, pretty much. Very, very few Christians. And if it wasn't for the population moving north and then through Europe and then over to the United States, I'm just not sure that Christianity would have survived. I'm really not. I think it would have been a world full of Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists primarily. That's my view. But because we're in this country surrounded by 2 oceans, and because Europe's still there, and Spain and Portugal still have a pretty hefty percentage of Christians, and because we're the second largest country population-wise, then Christianity is still, considered a valid religion. And I'm not discounting anything. I'm a Jesus geek, if you will. I'm a full believer in Jesus. It's just, for me, Jesus' father was not the God of the Old Testament. And I'll let that ride. You got to read the book to find out why.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, tell us your description of a spirit.
Of the spirit.
Of spirits in the Bible, I should say.
Spirits in the Bible. Well, that's a word that can be used multiple ways. Most people think of a spirit as something like a ghost or something you can probably see through. and typically considered to be a human or humanoid or something partially human or a human who hasn't passed over or crossed over. Or if you take it verbatim, a spirit's like the wind. It goes here and there. You don't see it. You just see the after effects of it. But in my world now, spirit has another meaning. It can mean a craft. I guess it's the Hebrew word ruach, and I have a hard time with that. Ruach means spirit or craft. Because of Zechariah 6, we come to realize that these chariots of fire, these horses up in the sky, are called spirits. Now, that changed things for me because that opened up a can of worms, so to speak. You go back and read, and there's a lot of places where you have to look at that word spirit and see just really what does that mean. Hebrew only had about 7,000 to 7,500 words compared to our, some people say, close to 200,000 words in the English language. So many, many words in the Hebrew have multiple meanings today. And spirit is just one of them. For an example, in Revelation 4, John goes up into the spirit. He sees a door open in heaven. I read that 100 times before it clicking the way it clicks now. And he was called up, and he went up into the spirit. How do you go up into the spirit? That's a craft. The spirit hovered in Genesis 1. The spirit hovered over the waters. Now, how does a spirit hover? In Genesis 1, before humans were created, how could you even have a spirit if you're reading the Bible, verbatim? I read it allegorically now, but how could you even have a spirit back then? That is a case where it's a craft, and there's other cases where you think of a cherub, you think of a horse, you think of clouds, you think of winds, you think of chariots of fire, you think of spirits, crafts. I gave over 30 references for UFOs in the Bible, and but some are direct and some are indirect. And perhaps one of the very best ones is you think about King David. He had a one-on-one relationship with this Israel God. They were connected mentally or telepathically some way, but he could actually call on this God, and this God would start up his spaceship and come to David. And there's a real good description of that in 2 Samuel chapter 22. It's a little lengthy. I don't know whether you want me to get into that or not, but it's a telltale sign. You want me to? Sure.
Yeah.
I'd have to read it first if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm in 2 Samuel 22, verses 7 through 16. And I'm reading out of a new Bible. It's called the Keys of the Kingdom Bible. And the audience may or may not be familiar with it, but it has reinserted the word Elohim where it's supposed to be all throughout the Old Testament. It has put all the Old Testament books in their proper order, and I really love this translation. Anyway, starting in 7, in my distress, I called to Yahweh, and I called out to my Elohim, and he heard my voice out of his temple. Now, keep in mind, the temple has not been built yet. This is out of Yahweh's temple. And my call into his ears. Then the ground shook and trembled. The foundations of the heavens moved and shook because he was angry. A smoke went up out of his nostrils. God does not smoke. And out of his mouth, fire devoured, coals were kindled by it. And he parted the heavens and came down, and darkness was under his feet. And he rode on a cherub. That's the same thing as a cherub. which is mentioned multiple times in other Psalms. And he flew, and he was seen on the wings of the wind. And he made pavilions of darkness all around him, gatherings of dark waters, thick clouds of the skies. Through the brightness before him, coals of fire were kindled. Yahweh thundered from the heavens, and Elyon uttered his voice. And he shot arrows and scattered them, lightning and confounded them. And the channels of the sea appeared, and the foundations of the world were uncovered at the rebuking of Yahweh, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. Now, that is loaded. That is loaded. Think about this. His temple, without a doubt, was a craft. We know from multiple other verses that he resided in the mountains of Seir, which was close to Sinai. We know that he had a connection with David without doubt. We know now that God flies. Verbatim, he flies. And he also flies in Psalm 18:10. The ground shook. This is the craft starting up. Okay? Of course the ground's going to shake. Let's think of a rocket taking off. Smoke out of his nostrils. It's not marijuana. It's not cigarette smoke. It's an exhaust smoke, people, without doubt. Out of his mouth, fire devoured. What was in front of him, fire devoured. He had weapons on the ship, which comes into mind instantly. Sodom and Gomorrah. You wondered how that happened. And it's also, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but it's also mentioned in Joel chapter 2. You'll see people coming in fast, destroying what's in front of them, basically Eden in front of them, and nothing but desert and deserted places behind them. Parted the heavens. This is much like the UFO incident at O'Hare back in November of 2006. You may have seen it on TV. If you haven't, for a period of a few minutes, a UFO was seen at O'Hare International. It was a typical saucer shape. It took off straight up in the sky, and when it did that, it evaporated the clouds and made a donut in the clouds. This is what is meant by parting the heavens in my world. Darkness under his feet, that's dust and debris from the craft, came down. This is one of the 13 times in the Old Testament God comes down. How does God, I'm asking, I guess both of you, Sam and Keegan, as well as the audience, how do you go down if you're already supposed to be there? Well, think about that. And this God goes down some 13 times. In the Protestant, traditions, we're taught that God is omnipotent, God is sagacious, he's omnificent, he's omnipresent, and he's immutable. And I would say I have problems with each of those now. And this is the case where God is not everywhere all the time, and he can't be, and he resides in a ship when he's was here. Shooting arrows and lightning. Again, that's some type of weapon. Anything when you read bows and arrows, that's pretty much referring to some type of an electromagnetic, or perhaps plasma weapon of some type. God did not shoot anybody with bows and arrows. But when you read bows and arrows and darts, that's some type of a weapon in a lot of cases. In other cases, it's something that affects your spirituality. But you have to be careful on how you interpret that. He uncovered the foundations of the world, the blast of the breath of his nostrils again, some type of weapon, without a doubt. And that's just, for me, without doubt, this God came in a craft, went to Mount Sinai, did a shock and awe with the Hebrews. That's how he tried to, get power, was through shock and awe. He didn't want to earn it. He wanted to force it on people through fear. And, we're taught to fear the God But I think when you fear God, I think it really refers to actual fear as into being scared, not respect, but to being scared. I think that's one place where the churches today have it incorrect. But, Israel never did come around. I mean, he gave them boils and diseases and killed them and put them in the wilderness, and time again, they would not follow Yahweh. And over a period of time, Yahweh, of course, left, as well as all the other gods. They all could fly. I mean, they're not here now. I mean, there's a verse that says, call on God while he is near. But that was in the past. That was referring back to that time. God is not near now. God is away. Again, John 14, if you think that's the same God. So it has elevated, again, my vision or envision of what God is. God is total spirit, neither male nor female. We're all some way, somehow a part of it. When we think, when we pray, when we meditate, we create photons, we create brain waves, some type of electricity. It goes out, it's heard. And the more consciousness you have, the more power you have to do that. So for me now, it's all a part of increasing consciousness as this life goes on. And I'm just as guilty, I guess, as anybody else with, wanting material things. But I'm not saying material things are bad. I'm just saying they can be an impediment because it takes time away. So, did I answer your question about spirit?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You did a very good job. Sam, was there anything you wanted to say?
From reading this book, and don't push my mic away. Sorry, my mic might go further away. But from reading this book and the other ones that I've had the chance to read, you have such a way of saying and like describing things, but then also bringing everything kind of full circle and describe it all. I think you did an incredible job on it. And
well, thank you very much. That's flattering. Appreciate it.
Yeah, especially from someone.
I mean, it's from my heart. It is my reality. I'm not saying this applies to anybody else but me, but this has been my spiritual journey, and it's really jerked the rug out from underneath me. I've been completely changed by reality.
Right.
I'm not afraid to die. I know I've screwed up. I know I'm not going to hell. I know I'm going to be forgiven. I know I may have had a say-so in this life that I have now. In fact, we all may have had a say-so in the lives we have. We may not realize it, but there's a reason, and it must be for overcoming weaknesses that we have, without a doubt. So we're all not going to be children forever. So at some point in time, and time doesn't even exist, that's another thing we could get into, but there is no such thing as time. So, where does time start and where does time end? The point is it's infinity both ways. We continue on. The soul never dies. So however long it takes, none of us are on the same point on our spiritual journeys. We're all separate, but yet we're all the same, and we're all brothers and sisters. We're all here for a purpose. We're all here on this planet for a purpose, and this planet is not a 4-star hotel. We've got issues here. This is a pretty heavy-duty learning experience here. I think that could be one of the reasons they haven't made themselves known in recent times.
No, I definitely agree with that, because everybody is trying to be so divided.
I think we're more divided now than we've ever been.
I would agree with that.
Pretty sad, actually. Hi, Kitty.
Hey, wants to make an appearance, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, Wally, I will say reading it, I could definitely hear you talking in the book. So I could definitely tell you wrote it. Like, your voice was very present, at least for me, because I've talked to you. I know how you talk, so I definitely could hear you, like your voice talking in my head. It was pretty cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Keegan.
I agree.
Thanks,
I
Sam.
definitely agree with that. Yeah, it was
Thanks.
very.
I just hope I could get people maybe to jump off one lily pad onto another. Just expand a little bit. Expand a little bit. Realize that not everything we're taught is necessarily correct. And do your own homework. Don't listen to what I say or someone else says. There's material out there. You can do your own homework and come to your own conclusions and realize maybe it's going to be the same thing I realize, that things aren't quite like they seem, and not quite like you go to a Christian bookstore and pick up a book out of there and read, because pretty much they all are the same thing. Let me just say that life goes on, and it really is internal, not external, but internal. Learn who you are, learn your place in the universe, learn why you're here, and learn you're not going to be condemned for your mistakes. We all make mistakes. And, I honestly believe when you cross over, there's a love so great we can't understand it. That love permeates the whole universes. And they call it agape, or if you're here in the South, they call it agape. I think the correct pronunciation is actually agape, but it is a love that we don't deserve, a love that's dished out in such quantities that it's unmeasurable. And that goes hand to hand with us being children. It goes hand in hand with Jesus's sayings about children. And I think you'll get through just fine if you just focus on Jesus and his teachings, including the teachings that did not make it into the Bible. And that includes, some of the books I've put in the appendix of the 3 books that I've written. I've put the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas in twice in my last 2 books. So they're very important. I wish everybody could read that.
Yeah, for sure. You've definitely put in a lot of work, because it's been eight years now. This 8-year journey.
I started studying in I guess it would be around late 2017. The day I retired, the day after that, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So I saw the craft the same month I retired. I did not get to do a lot of studying while she was still alive. But once she passed, I just felt this calling. So I did a little over 2 years of full study before I wrote my first book, Crossing the Crevice. And then I've continued to do, readings and studies since then, and been on a lot of podcasts, including yours and a lot of other people, just telling what's happened and how it's changed me. So, I'm more at ease now than I ever was going to a church. It's like the weights were lifted off, because I now know for me what I believe. I now know for me what is right, what's wrong, what was mistaught, what was only given, little tainted passages that really fit an agenda. I hate to keep using the word agenda, but for me now, I know of no other word. You could call it an itinerary or a dogma or line of thought, but it's very narrow if you're, in a Protestant religion. You go to a church here in this country, hooping and hollering. If you go the county I'm originally from, you might see snake handling. You might see people rolling in the aisles. A lot of singing, a lot of noise. You go to a temple in Calcutta, for example, nothing but quiet. That's how they're different. That's how they're different. And that quiet is for you to connect with the source, with the one, with the what they call God. You don't do that with what we do here. Jesus says to go to a room and shut the door, and I think that's exactly what's incorporated in the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition as well.
You list a lot of different verses, and like you said, in the appendices, you have the different books and stuff. Now, you mentioned it in your book, so I'm going to ask you about it. It's a TV show. It's a location. Skinwalker Ranch. What do you find
I
interesting
love
about
that
it?
show.
Yeah.
I love that show. I hope that people that, tune into this podcast, if they're not aware of it, please be aware of it. It's on History Channel. And out of everything I've seen on TV, and this goes back to the 50s, this one program has the potential to really expand people's minds. Without a doubt, you can see orbs coming and going through solid objects. You can see crafts in the sky. You can see that perhaps Einstein was right with the relativity theory and that wormholes exist, and we are not alone, and we have never been alone. And I may be going one step further, but different dimensions. Yes, I would say so. I would say multiple dimensions. And different universes, I would say yes. I would not have said that in the past. I would just say the universe, but I believe there's even different universes now. And are there beings that operate on different frequencies? Without a doubt, yes. Are there beings that are much more intelligent, perhaps millions of years older than we are? I would say yes. And that's Earth years, by the way. Keep in mind, time doesn't even apply. But the biggest question for me is just how much does our government really know what's going on there? They seem to be a little bit interested.
Right. I mean, if they're talking about it now in the Congress and making that public, you got to think something's going on, right?
Yeah, you would think, but we're getting more drips. But where I live, and again, I'm in what's I guess used to be called the Bible Belt. We're still not ready for full disclosure. People would freak out. So from that standpoint, the powers to be, the people who have the top ultra clearances, and that's not our president, by the way, people that have Cosmos and Luna and Majestic clearances on that level, might be doing us a favor until we catch up a little more. The biggest thing that's going to happen, and the biggest variable is religion. That's what's going to have to have an instant change. And that's what's going to be scary for people, because religion, including Protestantism, seems to be the foundation for a lot of people, and they take their Bible literally. And if you're exposed to somebody who doesn't look like us, and you're exposed to other gods, and you realize that there's other dimensions, and the list goes on, it's going to have to be, as Dr. Barry Downing says, a complete meta-reformation of theology and religion. And that's the scary thing. That's people will realize that they've been taught an agenda, that it's going to happen instantly. And I could see the stores like Walmart, the shelves being empty. I could see people getting their guns. I could see people's hearts failing them. I could see murders in the streets. I could see rampage and just turmoil. For those of us that have more open minds, I would just say, what took so long? But but not everybody's like us. So you just have to remember what you used to believe, and I do this constantly. I came from where they're at now, so I'm certainly not going to belittle anybody. I came from the same place, and it took me seeing a craft right over my head. A year, by the way, before they came out on TV, I saw the white Tic Tac. But that was my catalyst. The people don't have a catalyst unless they have something to jerk them a little bit or to force them to move. Just going to church and Sunday school on Wednesdays and Sundays ain't gonna get it. So you got to have something to happen, whether it be on a worldwide disclosure event. That's something you got to be real careful about. we live in a fairly stable society, and I could see banks being closed and stores being empty and highways being completely plugged and cell phones being overloaded and just all kinds of issues if it would instantly come out that we're not alone. And in fact, we've been lying to you for 70 years. Well, actually, it gets us closer to 80 years. So,
yeah, with Roswell, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
In one of Within Grasp, my second book, I put a few quotes from Neil Armstrong, and they saw things on the moon. They saw other crafts watching them. They saw beings watching them, but they were not allowed to say that. It was on another channel. They had two different channels, one for, I guess, the way like Jesus taught, one for the commoners, us, and then one for the few people that were back in Houston that had clearances. So,
right. Kind of a fun one to end off. You've done the legwork, the dirty work. You're very well versed in all the books of the Bible and stuff. If there was a movie that you said you could look at and say is the most sincere of Jesus and his lifetime, or TV show, what would it be?
Yes, I'm hesitating. Just of Jesus's lifetime.
Or biblical stories, maybe if there's one that's better than just of Jesus or something.
Well, I'm getting close to 70 years old. I would probably say go back to Cecil DeMille's The Ten Commandments. That movie has stuck in my brain as being a literal reading of the Bible. If you don't believe in crafts, then you would fall into that category. And of course, that really doesn't get into Jesus a whole lot. There's been a few specials on the History Channel. I can't think of one of the names right now. It might have been called Jesus of Nazareth that I really got into and I thought was pretty nice. We often think that Jesus had white skin and his skin was actually copper colored. So he's definitely Middle Eastern. And he had those powers when he was born. So a lot of that was taken out of the Bible, of course. What can I say? Probably the one I saw on History Channel a couple of years back. I can't recall the exact name.
I lied. One more question.
Okay.
It's been kind of big just because we're talking TV shows.
Sure.
Something that I know a lot of people talk about recently, and it's kind of been big, is Chosen, I think is what it's called. It's a TV series. Have you watched that? And do you have any thoughts on that one?
I have not watched it. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. People ask me about the Billy the Kid Epics one, and I'm like, I've not watched it. And then they're like, oh, you're supposed to know. I'm like, I'm sorry.
I can answer your questions about Star Trek.
Ooh.
Right. Well, we'll have to have you on, and we'll do like a deep dive on one of the Star Trek movies. Do you have a favorite one?
If I had to pick one, I would probably go with the first one.
Okay.
Voyager. For the Star Trek movies. If I had to pick one of the original series, I would rank the original series first and Next Gen second and Voyager third and put Deep Space Nine as fourth. That's just in my world. I thought Voyager had a very good, plot to it. It was just on at the wrong time, and I was working nights at the time. There's still episodes of that I have not seen. It's on the H&I channel now, but I'm often asleep before it comes on. But they are running the old original Star Treks. It starts at 8, and then Next Gen's at 9. And I pretty much enjoy those, even watching them over and over. Spock's Brain is a good one. The Enterprise incident is a good one. And the Corbinite maneuver was a real good one. Those are probably my three favorites of the original Star Treks.
We'll see. Now we'll have to have you back on, and we'll do the original Star Trek movie and go from there. Because that'd be fun to do a deep dive on that. We haven't touched upon Star Trek yet, so that would be fun. But for anyone listening or watching this on YouTube, where can they find out more about you as well as your 3 books and pick up some copies to read themselves?
Well, go to my website. How many times do your guests say that? Go to my website. It's an easy website. It's otherflocks.net. www.otherflocks, plural, one word, lower caps or lower letters, .net. And you can read about me. You can read about the 3 books and what some other people had to say. And there's an active link on there. Will take you to Amazon for The Nucleus, which is the gold colored book, 8x10. You'll also see second edition copies of the first 2 books. We redid the front cover of Crossing the Crevice. The original one was red and had what I thought was a tic tac. And I had a lot of negative comments, people thinking that was a dragon or something evil or perhaps an eyeball. So I had Ken Goodsward just put on a regular spaceship. And then once you're in the book, you can realize exactly what I saw. But looking at the cover, you'll realize that's actually a UFO, which was I was trying to get across anyway, but it really didn't work with what I wanted to do.
Hey, it made sense to me. I thought of your cover when I was reading that Witness to Roswell book. I was like, oh, it's just like Ken's cover or Wally's cover of the Tic Tac. Yeah.
Did you have a good time in Roswell aside from being ill?
I didn't get ill till we got back.
Ah, okay.
I mean, I guess I did have a really bad migraine one of the days, but it was a really good time. I definitely recommend it. If you haven't done a festival, it's great. There's lots of speakers you can go and listen to. Lots of researchers. I'm sure you could be a speaker there. Like you've had some good experiences. I definitely recommend it. There's great food too. I mean, some good food.
Sam's going, No,
it was super fun.
We got interviewed.
Enjoyed it. Yeah, we got interviewed for their news.
Cool.
Yeah, national news. Yeah, it was crazy.
Cool. Well, we have here in Virginia Beach, we have Edgar Cayce's Center for what's it called, Advanced Learning, or ARE. There's some people coming in October that are often on Ancient Aliens to talk about ancient finds and monoliths, ancient stones and sites. I think I'm going to that, so I'm into that stuff too. I mean, how long we've been here keeps getting pushed back further and further and further. And I'm one of those that believe, well, that's just for this generation. There's other generations before that and before that. We're possibly the 4th generation on this planet. So,
right.
Anyway.
Is Tsoukalos going to be there?
Childress.
Okay.
And you had to ask. It only gets worse from here when you get older. Anyway, one other fellow that I'm familiar with that's been on there. So
okay. Well, thank you again, Wally. We appreciate you joining us. And like I said, we'll have to have you back on. We'll talk some Star Trek or, maybe there's another UFO movie or something you want to talk about. We're all game for it if you want to come on, because you're always a great guest. So.
The Day the Earth Stood Still is the most classic of all time.
I love that movie.
Me too. It is so real in so many ways. So.
We'll see. Now we'll have you on for Star Trek and The Day the Earth Stood Still. So.
Right. That is a good one.
All right. Well, Wally, you have a great rest of your night, and thank you again for joining us.
Guys, you're always great. You make chatting so much fun. I really enjoyed it. Thanks. Pleasure's mine.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate it. It's always fun. I always look forward. Sometimes there's interviews I'm like, but yours I'm always like pumped to go. I'm excited. me and Sam been talking about it for a while. So
thank you very much. You're very humble. Make me humble. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Have a good night.
Peace to you both. Let me do that. Live long and prosper.
Right. So once again, Sam and I want to say thank you to Wally for joining us with another awesome episode. He's always such a good guest. So make sure you guys go check out all his stuff. We'll put the links in the description below. He has 3 books out currently. And if you want to see more of him on the channel, we'll also put his playlist below as well. But until next time, for more Culz interviews, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click that link to your right. And don't forget to hit the like and give us a subscribe. And let us know, have you read any of Wally's books? And is there something you'd like us to cover on the channel? Tell us in the comments below.